Hello, welcome to Splice. Thank you so much for coming. We've got a couple of great poets tonight, Rodger Kamenetz and Kevin Prufer. To open it up though, I'll say it kind of feels like a stand-up set, but I don't mean it to be. We're just coming back from Seattle, AWP, right? It was fun. I know not everybody could make it. We had a great New Orleans representation with poets and fiction writers and nonfiction writers. And it was really good to see everybody. We're in Seattle, and it's an interesting town. I've never been before until last weekend. And all the Splice, Rodrigo, Sean, and I were there. We experienced a bit of culture shock. You're holding a beer, and you kind of like would look at the outside door, and like it's like they almost would see that you're thinking about leaving with a beer in your hand, and then you just get tackled. Like you get tackled for just thinking about leaving with the beer. And so that was a bit of a culture shock. But I guess to start off this Splice, I'd like to talk about y'all, the audience, and how much you kind of make this happen. And I'd like to kind of reframe the thinking about being an audience member here at this New Orleans reading. We think of it as very tight, intimate, local space, but as a matter of fact, it turns out that this is sort of a national thing. We were there talking, schmoozing with different poets and writers there, and 75%, I would say, had already kind of known about the scene here. They knew that it was heating up. They knew it was already hot. It's a hotbed of activity. And if they didn't, if they're that other 25%, then don't worry, we told them about it. And so you being here, it's not just like, oh, going to a poetry reading here in New Orleans. You're adding to the national vibe. So like reframe your thinking of, it's not just some local reading series you're here. People know about New Orleans through y'all, through us. And so it's just really great for you to be here and keep supporting it, so thank you very much. Some of the people that already know are Kevin and Rodger. And so I'll leave it to Rodrigo to introduce Rodger, our first reader for tonight.
All right. All right. Poet introductions. What are they? What are they supposed to do? What do they actually do? For some, myself included, they can sometimes be a joint declaration of poetically related tendencies contrasted to other tendencies. A poetic act itself meant to sharpen differentials in content, or form, or tone, or feeling, structures of feeling. But introductions can also be an essential impression of a poet compeer's prowess, a dwelling in the fascination with that compeer's poetic journey, a flickering of a flame that bends, sputters, but never funks out. I must admit that in my coffee field conversations with Rodger, I often find his free-form banter nearly as enriching as his written poetics. But that's a big nearly, folks, because when I'm hit with the poems themselves, I'm always struck by their depth of seriousness, their light-hearted humanity, and sharp wit. His latest collection, The Missing Jew, Selected Poems 1976 to 2022, which is available here today, is a book I'll be returning to for many years to come. So, a couple weeks back, Rodger dropped on me his relationship with the ancient and ever-new Jewish concept of midrash, derived from the root verb darash, which means to resort to, seek with care, inquire, require. It tones, let's just say, very well with what we usually call poetic inquiry. Midrash, in its many guises, seeks to discern values in texts, words, and letters as potential revelatory spaces. Midrash readings reimagine dominant narratival readings while crafting new ones to stand alongside, not replace former readings. It's also a mode of interpretation that not only engages the words of the text, behind the text and beyond the text, but also focuses on each letter and the words left unsaid by each line. And we will be treated here tonight by Rodger riffing on the ways of midrash. Midrash, Rodger said, also asks questions of the text. Sometimes it provides answers. Sometimes it leaves the reader to answer the questions. Holy shit, I thought, at Café Clouet. If that isn't a large part of my poetic bent, then what is? So I guess, after all, this introduction here is indeed a declared joint declaration of poetically related tendency contrasted to other tendencies. I'm implicated. Let's get implicated here, folks. But right before we start this reading, I want to share another poetic insight that Rodger dropped on me 2 weeks ago. He pointed out that Rashi, an acronym for Rabbi Shimeon Yitzhak, an 11th century commentator on the Torah, made a searing poetic point. Rashi said that the phrase, in the beginning God created the heavens and earth, was in fact a mistranslation with dire consequences. Through a series of grammatical comparisons, Rashi went on to show that the proper translation is when God was beginning to create the heavens and earth. His point is that events that follow are not necessarily in order, but simply some of the things that happened. So, my takeaway from that is that this when beginning to is what marks Rodger's poetics. It's not an origin, nor a destination, and not even a now per se, but a when beginning to. Rodger Kamenetz is the author of 13 books. His best known is The Jew in the Lotus, the story of rabbis making a holy pilgrimage through India to meet with the Dalai Lama. His account of their historic dialogue became an international bestseller, prompting a reevaluation of Judaism in the light of Buddhist thought. Now in its 37th printing overall, the book is a staple of college religion courses. The New York Times called it a revered text. A PBS documentary followed, and a sequel, Stalking Elijah, was awarded the National Jewish Book Award. His memoir, Terra Infirma, was described, quote, as one of the most beautiful books ever written about a mother and a son. When Rodger's The History of Last Night's Dream appeared in 2007, Oprah Winfrey interviewed him on her Soul Series program, saying, what's so exciting about this book is that when it talks about how there's a whole other life that we are living when we sleep, and that our dreams are there as offerings and gifts to us if we only recognize what the dreams are there to teach us. Born in Baltimore, Rodger Kamenetz has degrees from Yale. I should say that he was this is true story, in Yale when he was 16 years old. Johns Hopkins and Stanford. At Louisiana State University, he held a dual appointment as a professor of English and professor of religious studies, and founded the MFA program in creative writing and the Jewish studies minor. He retired as LSU Distinguished Professor and Sternberg Honors Chair Professor. He lives in New Orleans, where he devotes himself now to his work with clients who seek spiritual direction through dreams. You all should check out that website. But he's also our Rodger Kamenetz, someone you can just hang out with outside these doors, drink in hand. Unser bester Mensch, Rodger Kamenetz.
Okay, I'd like to hang out with you too sometime. Thank you, Rodrigo. That was really beautiful. We are compeers, comrades, and fellow Rodrigos. So I spell my Roger with a D also. Really happy to be here, and I'm so grateful to Saturn Bar and to Sean and Rodrigo for putting this beautiful series together. I think they just deserve so much credit for not just sitting around and talking, but doing something to make poetry alive, and thank you. We're all grateful. I'm going to stay within the time limit. I read a beautiful piece Jonathan wrote on Facebook about poets who go on and on and on past their time limit. Mine is 6 hours, so it's not a problem. I should be able to work okay. But okay. So when I was with Nancy and Bill in Prague years ago, and Moira was there too, I noticed in the markets that they sold marionettes. And I purchased a marionette of a rabbi, because I'd never seen a marionette of a rabbi. He had a black hat, and he had a beard, and a rather large nose. And, he was a rabbi marionette. So, I mean, I like that. You know, if you're going to go for that kind of thing, just go for it, right? Don't be shy. All right, so this is for the puppet rabbi of Prague. A rabbi puppet with black glass eyes dangles on black strings. Black hat, black payos, black beard, black shoes, a marionette rabbi for Prague's ghost Jews. I walk and I mourn, I buy the puppet to hang on my wall, knowing its hatred, but loving its death. I dislike the word orthodox, but that doesn't mean I dislike you, Bubby. Words carry their own smells as they come to mind, wafted on their own steam, like grandmother's soup with sliding yellow windows of soapy fat and swollen barley. That smell would fly a boy into a kitchen. You can look inside a word and find a person. Barley, grandmother. Shul. An old man flies to the boy and turns his black prayer book downside up. Did all the words fall out? Did all the holy words fall? Even as images come upside down in the eye, like words without wrappers, just plain words. Booby, raw, barley. Cooked long, they float up in a bubble, with a light brown line on their waist like a birth seam or grim mouth. These words taste good on the tongue. We pass them mouth to ear, ear to mouth. They carry intimacy of our breath. They were prayers once, but some use them for hammers and drills, for puppets. So, I don't know how many of you ever saw Allen Ginsberg in the flesh. How many have actually seen Allen? And most of you know what he looks like, I hope. So if you could just help me kind of bring Allen into the room, because the poem isn't addressed to you all, it's addressed to Allen, okay? So let's see to bring, you know, every place has a tutelary spirit. I read this poem in Newark, and so Allen is obviously already there, but he's been here, and so we can go to bring him in, and you can overhear. So this poem touches on a thing that actually happened back in the 70s, before most of you were born, but you know the story that Ezra Pound broadcast for Mussolini, and he was put in St. Elizabeth's Hospital, and eventually he went to Italy, and Allen went to visit him, and the title is Allen Ginsberg Forgives Ezra Pound on Behalf of the Jews. This is something I was too shy to ask you in that interview. Was it arrogance, your public relations brilliance, some deep desire to heal the split in American poesy, a rascally fuck you to all the rabbis you never loved, the synagogue hens, the Schelp knots you burst one by one, or was it because his cantos gave you permission to empty your battered mind into the walls of verse, that you felt a kinship and personal debt? You called his work a graph of the American mind, so that whatever was in that mind, Dolmetsch's lute, a fine eye gathering fire, Duccio, Rothschild and Roosevelt, poured into a cracked vase, bleeding syrup and lye. Obscurities like dust blew across the page. Raw jokes, fits of sweetness, Chinese characters, the doji of Venice, dull history of Adams and Jefferson, ledgers and correspondence. Yeats downstairs, a peacock in the pride of his eye. Irish, black, Yiddish, vaudeville routines, exact details with small significance. Vasco da Gama wore striped pants. And then, rising out of the mutter and ripple of mind, an upturned nipple, bronze in the light Pound saw and made us see, so that you, Allen Ginsberg, the biggest Jew in Poe business, would hunt him down in Venice to plant a kiss on his cheek. He was by then a broken man, besieged. "We get hippies," his Olga said. One pitched a tent in the garden. She ran him off with a hose. Journalists rang the bell, announcing they will tell both sides. What do they think we are? Ezra Pound is no pancake. You came in the summer of '67 chanting Hare Krishna outside his window. Back from India, Morocco, Japan, another stop on your wisdom journey. Martin Buber, Jerusalem sage, and your first Tibetan teacher, Dujam Rinpoche. Eyeing your hippie entourage, Olga asked, "Would you like to wash your hands?" But you said, "Do you people need any money?" Olga thought you a big, lovable dog who gives you a great slovenly kiss and gets lots of hair all over you. Dog Jew, hairy Jew, Allen, who sent you? Did you stop first in Rome for Primo Levi's blessing, whose hands trembled in Birkenau? Did you sing Hare Krishna outside Paul Celan's window before he jumped into the Seine? Or say Kaddish for his mother, murdered by men who also had theories about economics and race? Was there a depth of kindness in your public relations? Were you able to hold not only forgiveness, but the knowledge of all that needed forgiving? You met again that fall at the Sisi restaurant in Venice, you in dark glasses, rich Adamic beard, Pound's thin aged face, wisps of white hair. Across the table, you asked to say more than a few words. You did most of the talking, Pound in his silence and regret, then pausing in the yakety-yak of your eternal sentences, you asked, "Am I making sense?" For which Pound said, "Yes," and then mumbled, "But my poems don't make sense. Any good I've done has been spoiled by bad intentions." Then very slowly, with emphasis, "But the worst mistake I made was that stupid suburban prejudice of anti-Semitism." So Pound half confessed to a bearded Jew. For a Jew he saw in you, not a Buddhist, with the Jewish fire and sweetness and the eagerness to explain. From the time you heard Blake's voice in Harlem, you butt your head against the Hebrew God until Buddha lifted your prophet's mantle when Rinpoche told you, "If you see something horrible, don't cling to it. If you see something beautiful, don't cling to it." You told Pound, "I come to you as a Buddhist Jew." Fair enough. He shouldn't think himself forgiven by the other kind. Or was it Martin Buber who sent you when he told you to forget the voices of angels and demons? Our business is with the human. Pound learned that in the iron cage, you in the asylum. Celan knew it but couldn't live with it. Primo Levi knew it. but let go of the rope. Whoever sent you, Jew or Tibetan, when Ezra confessed, you forgave. Do you accept my blessing, you said? Pound. I do. But a year later, outside of McDonald's, in our strange American life, Pound shuffled off into the woods. Laughlin found him muttering, why don't you just discard me here? Now in the suburbs of Elysium, Ezra Pound, wander as you will past Big Mac wrappers and a few extra fries. Go into the dark woods where Dante roamed and hear once again the clear, sweet voices that drove you to make a beautiful thing. Or crack your pot against the stone of time. And you, Allen Ginsberg, in the land of 10,000 Buddhas, or in the simple heaven of your mothers and fathers, or raw bone under the earth, tell me, which is it now? If you see something beautiful, don't cling to it. Or is our business with the human, after all? So I thought I would read some longer pieces just because this is such a great opportunity to read longer pieces. So this poem is for the painter Mark Rothko. You probably know his work. You know, you've seen the squares and the little lines and squares, and they're pure light. Pretty amazing work. Rothko became pretty embittered after he became successful and committed suicide in 1971. So this is kind of a biography of Rothko, called Another Rothko. And Rothko kind of sounded like this. He spoke slowly and with great emphasis. So when Rothko's talking, I'll try to do that. That other high-pitched voice is mine. Okay. So. Another Rothko. Marcus Rothkowitz, 1920, Portland, Oregon. You came each Monday to Lincoln High, your diary, the sad thought of a week's hard work in mind. A long road, tough and bumpy, with milestones called days. The last one is far, far away, beyond that point where the horizon meets the earth. Beyond the point where the horizon meets the earth shines the last thin band of day, a grim smile where we step into darkness and the earth rolls away. Space turns into time there, frightening for anyone with a body. Because how do you breathe hours or suns? Don't you choke there on your blood? Just there, sunset, last milestone of their week, was the Sabbath you once knew in Dvinsk. Candles were lit in spite of not believing. As your mother waved her hands, she glimpsed a burning light between her fingers, then watched the wax run down to nothing. Jews wept in the streets. Cossacks bore knouts and whips. You claimed they left a scar on your nose. True or untrue, it was real. Like your story of quitting your father's shul at 8 in Dvinsk, or 13 in Portland after he died. Since God lives in eternity, let him keep time. Bad enough you lived on earth, enraged, since the horizon kept calling but never came closer. Another story you told, that the Cossacks took the Jews from town to a large mass grave. You stared hard at that black rectangle in the ground of mind. A darkness filled it with light. in the strange chemistry that transfers death to life from one world to another. So when we look at your work now, we see behind your eyes. Later, of course, they did drag Jews with Vince to the edge of a pit. By then, you were in New York. I've got to become a great painter because I found a way to live for 3 days on a can of sardines and a loaf of bread and the milk that I stole from somebody down the hall. You lived on bean soup, slept in a bathtub, cramped figures in your paintings, thrust them under horizons till they stooped, crushed your first wife's head to an eyeballed beak, her legs unseemly wide for balance. In another, you showed your huge left arm wrenched from the shoulder, your eyes black discs behind discs of blue. Some saw blood crawling on your painting hand. You swore it's only brown shadow. Edith supported you making jewelry. She sent you out to sell, an errand boy. Nearly 40, your paintings never sold, she kicked you out. You lay in bed for weeks, broken, soliloquizing. Human nature honors the conqueror and the martyr both. And if the conqueror martyrs himself? Morning, in your pajama top, smoking, staring deeply at yesterday, you read your work for what it showed, a rough terrain, no one to guide you. Stubbornness protected you. Failure protected you. For years, your appetite protected you. Barrel chest, nervous stalking between dinner courses. One hostess bought you prime steak just to watch you eat. You stretched out on the grass, soaking in Mozart, but when you stalked off in the dark to feed the fire, you drove a privy nail through your foot while Hitler invaded Poland. Your body could not protect you. Disconsolate, you sat, a boulder in a deck chair, sketching. The body cannot protect. Copying is worthless. You drew what's inside you. The body is split from head to toe, ribcage ripped open, androgynous, wounded breast and testicle, and a frieze of indifferent gods. The human figure did not meet my needs. Whoever used it mutilated. In his early work, God painted like Rothko, color born of color, born from darkness, from nothing. Withdrawal that a spark ran, still runs, the work unfinished nor will be, in time. So Zohar, Book of Brilliance, says, 700 years ago, Rothko, did you know? Would that have been a consolation? Jews distrust images, painters words. You stripped your paintings of figures, gave numbers instead of titles, saw behind the scene of face and place, your shapes, gestures, with no shame, actors in a play. They begin an unknown adventure in an unknown space. Ideas and plans are simply the doorway through which one has left the world. Imagine daylight through a doorway, mountains in the distance, close up a roadside weed in suppliant posture, intricate staircase of leaves. Awe is no illusion. Mountain after mountain goes back to mist, precise shapes of wild strawberry, God's latest exhibition. Delicate flowers with hundreds of petals, precise brushstrokes. What is meant by these forms? What intended? Since they no longer speak to us, no longer spoke to you, when the world of myth collapsed, art sank into melancholy, into half-lit darkness. The rain falls in torrential lines, but awe Something hides behind each thing, some word, in a language where word and thing are one. Not our words, but a life, or nothing. Another name is light. Again, not light that's seen. All words are wrong names. All images, idols. Jews distrust images, painters words. A Jewish painter has a problem. You emptied your paintings, made them huge, surrounded us in a field, till we too stripped off shape and story, number and name. Mysterious, the light floated off the canvases, hovered, trembling with its origin, its edges alive and vague, as if here is always the moment of birth. Behind it shined in underpainting another light that held it all. And was this for sale? One summer evening, your window open, you heard a passing voice. Gee, I wonder who lives in there with all those Rothkos. They gave you commissions. You painted and refused to make a Rothko. But you were Rothko. Dancing in the twist of fame, you craved. The harsh spotlight drowned the light behind your painting. Some saw it though, sad thought in mind. A last thin band of day, far, far away, beyond that point where the horizon meets the earth, where we step into darkness and the earth rolls away. I think I have time for a couple more. Okay, so this poem's called The Illustrated Book of God. I opened the Illustrated Book of God. It was written in all of gold, gold letters. There was a fire on page 1. The flames licked the page. I stopped reading with my eyes and read with my tongue. I tasted vermilion. I put my ear to the page and heard the lions roar. I heard the clouds. I touched the bleak thorns of the acacia. I marched on oceans, my feet grew weary. I sank into the delicious black mud with bare feet and bare bottom. I opened the door to the stranger who lit candles in the sun. I walked on the moon. I knew strange love of every kind, nothing was forbidden. I knew what other men thought they knew. The Father came to me and blessed my broken mind. He comforted the mother who had lost her child. He sang of the shepherd and the shape. My body disappeared and I walked into pages. The gold letters left imprint on my subtle body. I knew and knew the end and the beginning. I tasted the water of loving kindness and drank a fill. The peacocks led me to the horizon. The elephants recited their Bible. The lions returned and ate my heart. I died in the dark of my last page. The book went on, still unopened, still unknown, its hand beyond knowing. Thank you.
Another round of applause for Rilke Prize.
We'd like to buy one of those books. Let's have some books over here, right? After the reading. All right, next up we have Kevin Prufer. Microaggressions became part of a popular and necessary discourse over the last couple decades, but something we don't often consider are their opposite, micro pleasures. We have a very specific form of micro-pleasure that happens during carnival season and on Mardi Gras Day, namely, a little Mardi Gras magic. Y'all had some Mardi Gras magic this year? Right. For instance, on Fat Tuesday, my wife and I took respite in our friend's house in the Quarter. Dressed as koalas, we plopped on the couch, and I noticed a new Ohio review on the coffee table. Of course, I picked it up, skimmed the table of contents, and boom, I saw the name Kevin Prufer and the poem Chandler Brosser. So I gave it a read. This darkly funny yet brutal narrative lifescape of a fading writer was the Mardi Gras magic I needed at that moment. To say it was providence or destiny dissipates the enjoyment. A micro-pleasure is an expression of the now that can simultaneously connect with other nows, like tonight and its poetries. Prufer's poems pull these micro-pleasures, these ecstatic epiphanies, through a temporal poetics, a narrative manipulation of time. His poems allow us to experience time separately and simultaneously, at different speeds and causalities, chronologically and disjunctive. By unsyncopating our personal tenses and resyncopating our narrative practices, we can emerge through these poems more tactile of our participation in consciousness. And we come to see our presence in several relativities. It may seem daunting to acknowledge this power in poetry. Thankfully, Kevin Prufer's 9th collection of poetry, The Fears, is forthcoming from Copper Canyon. Other new books include The Art of Fiction and How He Loved Them, which received the Julie Suk Award, was a finalist for the Rilke Prize, and was longlisted for the 2019 Pulitzer Prize. He's editor of both New European Poets and Into English, poems, translations, commentaries, both from Graywolf Press. Since I see a few editors of presses and lit mags in the building here, he also edited literary publishing in the 21st century with Wayne Miller and Travis Kurowski, which is a conversation that has built a substantial piece of the framework for our current literary moment. It's a wonderful read. Another amazing series worth mentioning, with Wayne Miller and Martin Rock, Prufer directs the Unsung Masters series, a book series devoted to bringing the work of great but little-known authors to new generations of readers through the annual republication of a large body of each author's work, printed alongside essays, photographs, and ephemera. He also teaches in the creative writing program at the University of Houston. It's clear from his prolific participation in editing, publishing, writing, performing, and teaching that he is a vital node in the national network of poets, poetry, and poetics. Please welcome to the Splice stage, Kevin Prufer.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me, and it's a delight to read after Rodger. These poems are amazing, and thanks for the introduction. Can you hear me? Is this good?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm going to put on my reading glasses, rendering you all invisible, because they're strong. I was in this restaurant by myself, eating by myself, and I was eavesdropping on the conversation at the next table. It was somebody who was clearly in the military, and this woman he was, I think, going on a date with, and she did that annoying thing that people do at restaurants. She asked the waiter. She said to the waiter, "Just a glass of water for me," which is incredibly annoying. So I wrote this poem for her. It's called Overheard at a Restaurant. Just a glass of water for me, thank you. One ice cube, thanks. Just one. But please, you order what you want. Don't be shy, and don't worry about me. I am keeping trim for our troops. That ribeye looks promising though, doesn't it? The charcuterie platter, the bay shrimp in a nest of deconstructed kale drizzled with truffle oil. It's nice to have you home for a few days. Did you read about how they beheaded another captured soldier? Cut his head right off, clean as you like. I know, it's terrible. Awful, really. It ought to be a crime, but the water flushes me out, gives me a kind of inner peace. All this war must have been so hard on you, the bodies and the IEDs and the threatening music. It certainly has been hard on our nation, and we weren't even there. Broccolini, yes, you should have that. And the foie gras on toast with foraged mushrooms and lemon foam, you should try those too. And look at those cauliflower florets like petite puffs of smoke. The raviolini afloat in broth like misfired paratroopers. Did you read how they sliced his head right off? You should eat. They'll send you back and you'll be nothing but bones. It's funny that you mentioned that Chandler Brossard poem in the introduction, because I was listening to Rodger's poem about Allen Ginsberg, and I thought it's sort of in conversation with that poem. That is another poem about a writer of the generation or two back from me, or from a lot of us, and who's no longer with us. But I was working in this bookstore in Middletown, Connecticut, and it was a bookstore that was so broke they just paid me in books. And I thought I was going to be a novelist. I was about 20, and this new guy showed up, and the owner of the bookstore was really excited. The guy's going to be working at the bookstore with me and getting paid in books. And the guy who owned the bookstore was really excited because the new guy was some novelist who had been very famous once and was now not famous anymore. And I'm afraid I was sort of a jerk to him. I think because, I was feeling competitive, right? But it's a weird thing to be competitive with somebody who was famous once but isn't anymore, which is exactly how he was introduced to me. Anyway, I wrote this poem as a sort of apology to him. It's called Chandler Brossard. When I was 20 and desperate and broke, I worked part-time in a used bookstore in Middletown, Connecticut. I hated my job. I hated the cramped store, hated the paperbacks that came there as if to die. And more than anything, I wanted to write something lasting, a novel I scrawled in notebooks called Black Wing, about a dark-haired girl prized during the day for her beauty and intellect, who by night killed off poseurs, the ill-read, the clumsy of mind, the bombastic, thick-fingered, and mean. Somehow, through incompetence or charity, the young woman who owned the bookstore never quite fired me. Though one morning I found an old man at my place at the cash register. He wore a tight leather jacket, a turtleneck, a gray mustache, and when he saw me, he took off his glasses and set his book down on the dust-speckled counter. "This is Chandler Brossard," the owner told me. "You'll work with him now." He looked pale and sick. It was meant to transcend mystery. It was meant to live in contradiction, to be existential and enigmatic. That dark-haired girl destroying what was not beautiful, and the one-legged detective who pursued her but could never apprehend her. Chandler Brossard, thin-faced and coughing. Chandler Brossard, tilted back in his chair, reading a book in the sunlit dust motes. "What are you writing?" he asked me one day. And I closed my notebook. "Nothing," I said. Nothing at what age had done to his hands. He was, the owner told me, a famous writer once, but now he was dying. Chandler Brossard's Who Walk in Darkness grew yellow on the shelf, and he smelled like an old man, Vicks Vapo Rub and snuff and mint. How the knife comes down, I thought, typing away that night while one of my roommates burned his fingers on a joint and the other practiced his guitar. How the knife comes down in the flesh of the critic, in the sycophant, the vulgar, and the room grew colder because no one paid our bills. And I wanted Chandler Brossard to say something wise, but he was just an old man. And when I finally told him about Black Wing, the plot seemed suddenly contrived. ugly truth pursuing beauty, beauty making our foibles clear, that dark-haired girl who posed the horrible bodies for the one-legged detective to discover. By then, I'd read one of Brossard's novel and found it full of squalor, familiar, and he'd grown sicker, pale and unsteady, though he still walked from the hospital each morning and sat behind the counter selling paperbacks. My boss didn't know I'd been kicked out of my apartment, that when I couldn't find a friend to put me up, I unrolled the sleeping bag in the bookstore. And what I remember most about those sad days is lying on the floor among stacks of dying books, that sense of them rising above me in darkness, so many minds at work, so much trapped thought. While at his apartment, Chandler Brossard had a few months to live. And I slipped into sleep, dreamed of dark-haired angels, angels of squalor, angels of anger and forgetfulness and sudden mercy, in the black air above my head, angels descending to smother me with beauty and ambition and paper wings. And even if the detective caught her, then what? Would he know something more about immortal beauty? He would still be nothing, a dying, childless old man who had preserved a bit of himself in a book. Immortality figured as the workings of a mind caught in the sunlit trap of prose. How I wanted that to be true. That sense of eternal light streaming through store windows, its fingers playing over my face, warm and gentle, the scent of books and dust, how lovely to lie there without meaning or ambition, how deathless, and Chandler Brossard standing over me, kicking me gently awake with his boot. This is a shorter one. Go by book first. It takes place at one of those, those outdoor kind of outlet malls, on Highway 70, almost to Kansas, if you've ever been there. It's called National Anthem. And the shopping center said, "Give me, give me." And the moon turning on its pole said, "I love you, you who have so much to give." And you said, "Darling, if you could just wait in the car for 10 minutes and I'll be right out." And the sliding doors opened for you like a coat. Then the car ticked like the contented in the catatonic snow. And the black boys at the bus stop laughed in their hoods until a bus dragged them through the night and away. And a woman paced beneath the store, and sometimes I can hear the nation speak through the accumulation of the suburbs, Olive Garden and Exxon, Bed, Bath, and Beyond, the stars that throw their dimes around us all until the eyes say love, and the streets say yes, and the parking lot fills with angels blowing past the lines of freezing cars. You had been inside for longer than you said. And when you re-emerged, I went to help you with the bags. I'm sorry, into the cold air. I couldn't help. What was the body but a vessel, and what was the store but another larger vessel? The keys sang in my numb fingers. The flag applauded in the wind. And then I saw that you were looking up at it. I'm not going to read any new poems from this. I've got this book coming out, but I'm not used to it yet. So I'm sticking with poems I'm used to. But somebody asked if I would read this poem today. It's another really short one. And it takes place in Houston, where I live, which is like a larger and uglier New Orleans. It's just called Rain. Before rain, the windows grew thick with fog. Mist descended over the evening rooftops, and rain made generalities of the neighborhood. Rain made red leaves stick to car windows. Rain made the houses vague. A car slid through rain past rows of houses. The moon swiveled on a wet gear above it. The moon, a searchlight suspended from one of the airships, lit the vague face peering through the windshield. The car sliding down the rain-filled darkness toward the highway. The men controlling the airships were searching for him, and he passed through the rain as a thought passes through the collective mind of the state. Here I am in this rain-filled poem, looking out my kitchen window into the street, having read the news of the day. We are hunting them down in our neighborhoods. They have no place among us. And now that car has turned the corner and disappeared into the searchlights that make from the rain glittering cylinders of power. This is a poem that has a little story in it. This book is called The Art of Fiction, and I was just really interested. I was so glad you talked about controlling time, you know, like how one of the things you do when you're writing fiction or narrative poems is you're controlling how time works. It's a little bit like being God. You speed it up, you slow it down, you cut it into pieces. But this is a little story about a hitman. And a little canary. It's called Blueberry. Oh, it's a parakeet, sorry. It's in the first line. A parakeet. Blueberry. She wanted to play with the blue parakeet, so she cupped it in her hands, then let it perch on her index finger, until her father said the bird was tired, dear. It gets tired, it's just a little thing. So she made it rest an hour and then took it out again, letting it balance on her shoulder. Sometimes it tried to fly, but its wings had been clipped, so it fluttered to the floor and hid under the table, until she lifted it up again, stroking its head, while her father said, "It's late now. The bird needs to sleep, and so do you." The bird would survive a week. "It is wonderful to be in love," said the drone to its target. But the target was talking to his daughter. "In love, in love, in love," said the drone, fluttering at the target's window. It had a hot engine, propellers, low pulse. It took 20 pictures, which it sent wirelessly to the central office. Pictures of a man in a well-lit dining room, his dark-haired daughter, and her blue parakeet. He was, the investigators believed, a very bad man, so they observed him with the attention of a lover. Everything he said, their drone recorded, compressed, and sent on to the bureau, where such information was processed for the prosecution. Before she returned it to its cage, she let the bird peck at a pile of seeds she held in her palm. The bird ate just a little. "Blueberry, blueberry," she said, stroking its feathers, while her father spoke tersely on the phone, then studied the map he'd spread on the table. A map the little drone tried to photograph through the window. In her bedroom, the cage was an empty head. But when she opened the door and the parakeet hopped inside, the cage was alive with thought. And when she covered it for the night, the feverish cage imagined first the apartment and its tempting windows, and then the sky beyond them, the pulse of heat on sun-dappled wings, the vast and heavenward distances. "Darling," her father said at her bedroom door, "I've got to go out for a bit, but I'll be right back." So the girl fetched the parakeet and turned on the TV, while the drone followed her father down the street, hovering above his car as he merged onto the highway. The blue parakeet balanced on the girl's finger, looking toward the black windows. Then it hopped onto her shoulder, its quick little heart flickering in its chest. "Blueberry, blueberry," she said, posing it on the chair's back, the mantel, the bookshelf, until the bird fluttered to the floor again and hid among the newspapers. "Don't forget I love you," the drone said, as the bullet found its victim, and her father slipped the gun back into his pocket, walking calmly down the dead man's driveway. I love you, as he pulled into the street. I love you, as he turned left onto the highway ramp toward home. The little drone right behind him, click, 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 said the part of its brain that takes pictures and sends them on to the young men at the central office. When he got home, he found his daughter asleep on the sofa, all the lights on, the blue parakeet catching its breath on the curtain rod. She's so light, he thought, carrying her to bed. Light as a thought. He loved her too much. And the young men at the central office put away the lovesick drone. And her father put on his pajamas and turned out the lights. In the middle of the night, the parakeet returned to its cage, where it knew it would be safe. I'll just read two more poems, a short one and a regular one. I'm just trying to decide which short one. There aren't that many. When you write a book called The Art of Fiction, they all get really long. But here's a short one. But here's a medium-sized one. No, here's a short one. That's not medium-sized. This is a poem about voting. It was in the election that Hillary Clinton didn't win in. It's called I Have Voted. The dogs tipped the garbage and the meat spilled out. The larger dogs sniffed it, the smaller stood to the side and growled. The meat quivered on the floor. I'd kept it too long. It was slick and fat. It had expired. All this while I stood in line, and then the voting machine glowed greenly. Yes, 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 I told it. While the large dog licked the meat, lifted it gingerly with its mouth, dropped it wetly to the floor. And America, I said, walking home from the high school gymnasium, I love you, I am your son, I have voted. While the two dogs circled the mess, growling, oh, my beautiful country, a bolt gun reduces an animal instantly to unconsciousness. No pain, says the handbook called Bolt Stunning Techniques for Cattle. Draw an X from the tops of the eyes to the tips of the horns. The bolt goes in there, gently, right into the skull, and then we have meat for the family, for the country, for the dogs to circle. I am always proud to cast my ballot, my information, into the nation's stunned skull. The meat had a suspicious smell. The little dog wouldn't stop yipping, but the larger dog had the fat pink thing in its jaws. This is the last poem I'm going to read. I was at this lecture in Houston, and I won't say his name, but this guy I hate, was talking. Say his name. No. He was talking about literary translation, and he said this phrase. He said, "A poem in translation is like the dead body of a foreigner washed up on our shores." I remember thinking, like, we all went in the audience. We all went collectively, "Oh." Because it sounded profound, but then when I thought about it, I thought that's like the dumbest thing I ever heard. And it's also insulting. I mean, you know, to foreigners, I suppose. So, and I didn't like him anyway. So I wrote this poem for him, and it's called The Translator. All my poems have these little plus signs. I keep pausing, I never have said. I have little plus signs between sections where I pause. I have this fantasy that every section of a poem is like in addition to the previous section. And then there's an invisible equal sign at the end, you know? So when I pause, they're plus signs. The Translator. Drink before I read this. I get so mad. The Translator. A poem in translation, the young man was fond of saying, is like the dead body of a foreigner washed up on our shores. Here, he usually paused to let the metaphor sink in. Some members of the audience nodded thoughtfully. I will now read from my translations of a little-known ancient Roman poet, he told them, shuffling his papers and looking into the dark, half-empty auditorium. The dead body refused to be still. The waves loved it too much, pushing it onto the beach, then rolling it seaward again, and so it made its way down the beach, alighting for a moment, or several moments, on the wet sand, then bobbing out among the American swimmers. 120 foreigners in a leaking boat is too many, so the ocean fills with poems. Some retain the qualities of their original language, but others sink into a new language. Here I am, out here. I can see your oil rigs glittering on the horizon, says the young woman, who no one listens to. Or she says nothing, clinging to the side of the waterlogged boat where she has floated all night among the drifting bodies. A few of them became tangled among the oil rigs, while others arrived gently on our shore. A poem that has floated some distance from its accident transforms. So the people run away in horror when at last he came to rest on a crowded part of the beach. You foreigners, in your many-sailed ships, come join the empire, the translator intones from his spotlit podium, and the audience sighs. Here I am, out here, says a little voice inside the translation, a voice no one, not even the translator, can hear. The audience had come to hear a lecture on poetry in translation, and now the translator was going on about that ancient Roman tendency to absorb, and therefore transform foreign cultures, their gods and foods. Outside the auditorium, it had grown dark, a perfect summer night. The 1,000 vessels on the great black ocean glittered and loomed. And for days, bodies washed up on the beach. Now the American workers zippered them into vinyl bags, which, in the translator's metaphor, constitutes a kind of publication. But what is there to say about that young woman, still clinging to the wreckage 2 days into my poem? A gentle summer rain prickles her skin. Here I am, she says, looking toward the oil rigs hunkering between her and the shore. Here I am. She is a very fine woman, and someone should translate her.
Keep it going for Kevin Prufer and Rodger Kamenetz. I don't have much to say except the flip side of the AWP experience. I mentioned earlier that it became very apparent to me that the New Orleans scene, the literary scene, has a very national outreach. On the flip side, the first night of that hellish conference, at the hotel bar with a big group of New Orleans writers, one of the poets who's here tonight slid up, saw the group, said, "Y'all, I'm homesick," and then stepped further into the group. I'm a little slow, and was a few beers in. Don't worry, we didn't buy the beers from the hotel bar. We brought them from outside. Took me a minute to realize that, oh, we're representing the homes. Like, you're not homesick anymore because we're here together. And so that flipping from the national to the locality of it, it just made me realize, well, I'm certainly not homesick anymore being here at Splice with you all, with Rodrigo, Sean, Rodger, and Kevin. And it's just that very nature of, we think of what makes a house a home. It always comes from the inside, but sometimes it's actually just the mere proximity of one another. And so I'll just say and end it simply, it's really, really nice to be home. Thank you.